My guest is Oleg Grodnensky at LSI 2023. Oleg, thanks for coming by the studio.
Thank you, Ben. Great to be here.
So you're going to be leading a panel day 2. So this is day 1 at LSI. Tomorrow, what's your panel going to be about?
Well, we want to talk about data and how data particularly works in businesses and how data is really a driving force of certain businesses and really bring up opportunities that are companies that we particularly from the fund perspective thought that they're really going in the right places as far as sort of their strategy and their business proposition within the healthcare continuum. And, first off, I would say that this is sort of a new entrance into the LSI because primarily we, been here, this is my third time. Most companies are kind of in the Series A, Series B round and sort of early in their commercial path and wanted to bring more sort of more mature companies that have been around, have, I would say, around 20 million trailing revenue mark that obviously been gone through commercialization, product launch, and all the headaches that sort of come with it before you kind of get to scale.
I like the idea that you're bringing companies that are more mature to sort of round out the early stage flavor that's at LSI. So what is it about the mature companies that they've been through that you think can help other entrepreneurs get ready for that stage?
Well, I think it's kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily it's, learn from other people's mistakes, but I think it's more about hearing, their stories, how they were originally developing one technology and then how data came into play that really made them rethink and sort of be the central piece and the cornerstone of their development strategy that had them essentially pivot their plans and commercial launch. And I think that when one of the things that I saw here at LSI for the last couple of years, when you talk to folks that are developing robotic solutions, when you start talking to them about, well, what are you going to do about software? What's your strategy? And, most people just don't have an answer because for the most part, they're coming from a very different industry. They're coming from either it's an engineer that's sort of a hardware person or whether it's a practitioner. And, they're not really sort of thinking that it's not just creating a device. It's actually everything else that this device does and all the data points that this device produces and how that would actually influence how that device will further advance in its development stage and whether the commercial proposition that this device offers is actually viable or not. And for most cases, I would say it's always, as we've seen from, most consolidators right now, I'm talking about, Stryker, Medtronic, et cetera, or Zimmer, for instance, I would say that for them, it's really creating a data source that can constantly sort of circularly fits back into its own system to essentially provide more input and then develop further and further a new proposition, right? And then whether it's additional software development piece that sort of gets back and then an add-on to the existing product, or it's better improvement, right? So it's sort of, I feel that we're in an ever-changing environment today where you don't really have an answer because, if we look back at human genome, it's been 20 years or even more, and we're still sort of haven't figured it out, right? I remember when I was on Wall Street back in 1999, we thought we're going to have, there were companies going public at the time that had, protein sort of a chip that would enable you based on your DNA to tell you what kind of medicine you need to take based on your profile. That was 24 years ago, right? So I think, people tend to project a lot in most cases. And, I think what most folks realize that it actually takes a lot longer, it takes a lot more grit, and it takes a lot more to deliver a product that's going to stick, that will have a customer base. And you constantly need to be developing and innovating. You can't sit still because you get a lot more data inputs. And those who actually are able to process and understand what that data does will be probably in a much more advantageous position than the ones that are just sort of sitting still and monetizing their existing customer base. So I think it's really critical to adjust the business strategy for any particular product and sort of Not to say that, look, I got data, I'm going to do AI, I'm going to do, algorithms and, whatever you want to call the sort of jazz words. But I think it's really about actually delivering something that works, that feeds the system back into and provides critical output that actually has patient outcome. I think if you look sort of at the investor capital that historically, there's a lot less capital going into med devices than it's actually going into biotech, right? And it's a very, very simple formula. If you look at big pharma, I would say 80% of products that are blockbuster drugs actually were acquired at a certain point, right? They're never actually generated internally. So, and from the investor standpoint, you always have this upside by investing into biotech company, and it essentially gets acquired before it goes commercial, right? So, and there's been a lot more acquisitions, obviously, and it's kind of fueling the whole system. And medtech's been very different. And primarily, it's always sort of helping the big guy with tuck-in acquisitions and sort of solving a little issue that maybe improves the margins or does something better. And really didn't account for availability of technology that is essentially becoming very accessible and essentially a commodity today, right? And it's becoming more and more ability to calculate and ability to sort of process data is increasing tenfold or even hundredfold. And as a result, sort of combining device or a procedure with data together and then seeing preoperatively or operatively or postoperatively, and how that all kind of correlates in one ecosystem and how all these data points correlate to each other will really create an opportunity to actually derive better outcome. And also, one of the things we realized talking to a lot of physicians and also to health systems is that for them, they're all focused on cutting costs and providing better outcome and essentially refocusing their strategy after COVID to actually worry about the patient. And I think that's the driving force. And, second of all, it's also the budget deficit that we currently have, 31 trillion. A big part of it is, Medicare and Medicaid. So, and that's not going anywhere. And it's not like our aging population is getting smaller. So I think, so to me, I feel this is the opportunity to actually have direct impact from the procedure versus a therapeutic, whether it's a drug or you don't know how it will react, right? It takes time. Here it's very direct impact. It's very direct correlation between the procedure and then how that actually correlates into patient's health at the end, right? So if you can track that entire process and understand what works, what doesn't, how you can improve, that essentially enables you to do better, faster, and not make mistakes, and to make system more efficient. And I think together, I just think it's a very large data equation that is not solvable overnight. It's a direction.
So as an investor, how do you find those companies that you think are best able to sort of be on that trajectory? Is there a secret sauce, or is there a combination that you look for that tends to work out better? What would you tell them?
I mean, look, I think it's a combination of various factors, right? As an investor, you always have to think, how do you move from this point to the next, and what's your exit? And as we have seen last year, there was no medtech IPOs, period, in 2022. And I don't know how this year is going to look, but it's very challenging, right? And then when you sort of start thinking, what's my path to exit? You have to consider all options, right? And of course, and you have to rely on fundamentals. I think that after pandemic, I would say in 2021, everyone sort of lost their fundamental hat because it was sort of primarily, as you've seen in markets, we had flying taxis, we went to the moon and back, and and I think that the retail capital that fueled this craziness essentially resulted in a huge pushback today from public investors to really be sort of more conservative than they should be, and essentially putting everybody back in kind of very bad places, if I would say, right? So, but it's still cheaper to raise capital publicly than it is privately, because everything sort of triggers down, right? And so I would say that you have to always kind of take into perspective markets, right? And that's why, for the most part, a lot of folks just sitting back on their capital and waiting today. And by the way, they've raised record amounts in 2021. So I think it really has to be driven by profitability, by margins, by TAM, and of course, the management team. Of course, that's the key. So and it has to be kind of position the business towards more of a SaaS model than it is towards device. It's almost like, I would say, you have a device is an invitation to a SaaS model. It doesn't work the other way for the most part. So you have to be in a position to monetize and continue to develop and advance and improve the product you currently have. And then it sort of becomes this sort of circle where, in my mind, I think, medical technology will become essentially a SaaS model over time.
It's very interesting. I love the combination products for pharma. And I just feel like if pharma knew like the things that have been used inside of, that we take for granted in device that are trusted, tried, proven, and many of them off patent, and use that as a delivery vehicle. And so finding a way for now to say, well, now we're going to deliver data, we're going to deliver a better AI, or we're going to fuel AI because we've got devices that we know can work, that are therapeutic and are going to meet the clinical need, but it's also getting more information about the patient. Could be a whole new age of medical device.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think this is definitely, I would say a couple of years ago, when you had a device that was collecting data, it was almost impossible to agree with the hospital to actually have any data back. And now I think everyone realizes that that's a common currency for our progress, for our future, because everyone is interested to share data in order to provide better outcome, because everyone benefits, provider, payer, and the patients at the end of the day, right? So it's almost, and then of course, we have data privacy laws in this country, particularly when it comes to healthcare data, that are the best, right? That's where you start. Everyone talks about data privacy in other areas, but I think that's a very tough one to go back from. So, but here we already have an ecosystem that protects patients' data. And then the working securely with information allows us to develop and create future directions that could help improve outcomes, right? And I think you kind of have to sort of create your own real estate first and establish your, I would say, call it plumbing when it comes to software and infrastructure, and be in position to take advantage of whatever you find. It's almost, it's I guess the gold rush. You buy the territory and then you say, okay, maybe I'll find gold here, right? But if you don't establish your territory, if you don't establish your infrastructure, I think you're going to be at the loss. So I think any company today needs to really focus on the data aspect of their business, because there's always one. There's always a concern, or everyone is always focusing on profitability. Everyone is focusing, okay, what if I do this, what happens, right? If you're trying to sell someone a device, you have to think through what that means in terms of bottom line, right? And how that's actually going to impact whatever process you undergo, right? And I think that's what sometimes folks are not really thinking it through effectively. And I see that quite a lot when, if you got your TAM wrong, you haven't thought through, there are things that you just don't know that others are doing. And it could really change the game. So it's not easy to be an entrepreneur, don't get me wrong. I think it's very tough. But you have to sort of think through a lot more today than you had before, because previously the system was didn't have this data aspect as you do now, and then that becomes this huge ocean that essentially everyone is swimming in it, and you can be eaten or you can eat someone, right? So it sort of gives you an opportunity and risk at the same time. So you have to think about those things now when you start something.
I like that. You made me think of the ocean, and I love the analogy of the blue ocean and the red ocean. So that blue ocean is where it's just you, clear sailing, and you can go as far as you like. The red ocean is where there's all that competition, there's all that churn, there's all the other fish. So it sounds like your advice is to help these companies, get your device, find your area, stake out your claim, find that blue ocean, and then get the data you need to feed the rest of it as your device propels into the system.
Yeah, no, I think it's the right, it's kind of like the right way to think about it, but at the same time, there's no such thing as a permanent blue ocean because it's a matter of time. You can only buy yourself a certain amount of time, right, until somebody else comes in. And I think today, every single big company, we're talking about Google, we're talking about Apple, are trying to get into healthcare because that's the most lucrative business to be in, and their technology, their financial abilities are you can build the company overnight with billions of dollars, right, if you want to. So I think you have to be cognizant of the fact that the competition is fierce, and not thinking that you're protected forever. That's just the wrong way to approach the business. I think that there's been many attempts to kind of get into the field, and obviously there's a lot of smart people and a lot of capital behind those names. I think that you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, you're protected, obviously, from the IP perspective, and, freedom to operate and all those things, obviously basic. But at the same time, you also need to think through how is your product will fit in the general ecosystem if you are part of someone or something, or if you're collaborating with someone, how you can all work together to create better outcomes, right? Because it's almost like once you have more data points, right, and you start adding, your DNA or your blood work, your results, your wearable data. I mean, it just becomes a nightmare of data, and then try to correlate how all these certain data points, how you can create an algorithm out of it. It's going to take some time, right? And the fact is we have OpenAI project and all these other things, and I think someone's developing something for healthcare. I believe Google it was. So it's the uptake is fast, right? But the beauty about healthcare is the data is protected, so you can't necessarily jump in like you could do in financial technology markets overnight and create a huge margin. Here you have to be very cognizant of risks if you do something wrong, and if there's a data leakage, or how that actually impacts the patient's life at the end of the day. So it's not the bank account, right? It's so I think the quality and the amount of work that goes into it is very different.
Oleg, you've given us a tremendous insight into how data is going to change healthcare. Thank you for coming by the studio. Have a great LSI.
Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate the questions. It's been a very fruitful discussion. I hope that most companies here will take some notes from this, from some of these topics, and hopefully it will be helpful.